There comes a moment in every warrior's life when the blade shakes, when the breath shortens, when the world that once obeyed your discipline begins to fracture beneath your feet. Most people panic when this happens, but the true warrior understands something deeper. The collapse is not the end. It is the ancient doorway into mastery. When everything falls apart, a man meets himself, not the self he shows the world, but the one hidden beneath fear, ego, and noise, the raw spirit, the untested core, the silent witness. This is a Zen Combat State, the place where chaos becomes a teacher and discipline becomes the final blade that cannot be taken from you. Our story begins with a young swordsman named Ren, trained his entire life to be unshakable, yet living with a quiet, unspoken fear that his strength exists only when the world is stable. When his village burns and his identity shatters, Ren seeks out an old reclusive monk named Master Kaidan, a man who once walked a warrior path but abandoned the sword for an ancient inner system known only as the way of stillness. Through trials of silence, confrontation with ego, and a spiritual descent into the self, Ren learns what it means to remain present when everything crumbles, and to wield a power that comes not from the blade, but from the mind that controls it. Chapter 1: The Village of Smoke and the Shattering of Certainty. The mountain path was quiet that evening, too quiet for Ren's liking. He had walked this road 1,000 times, returning from training grounds where the young warriors of his province honed their blades and tested their pride. The air here was usually alive with distant laughter, the faint thrum of life drifting from the village below. But today, only the wind answered him, cold, thin, unnatural. Ren paused at the ridge overlooking home, and his breath, steady from years of discipline, fractured. Smoke, thick, rising, dark as a storm, billowing upward where roofs once caught the sunlight. His heart lurched. The body reacts before the mind can make sense of disaster. It is ancient biology, fear sharpening the senses, adrenaline calling the warrior forth. But there are moments when fear does not sharpen. It stuns. This was one of them. Ren sprinted down the slope, feet scattering gravel across stone. The world blurred into a smear of pine trees and dust. His training said move efficiently. His spirit said run until the earth itself tears beneath you. When he reached the village gate, he understood the full weight of silence. It wasn't empty. It was listening. Buildings were blackened skeletons, charcoal frames, ash drifting like winter snow, pots shattered, doors torn from hinges. He stepped through the remains of his childhood home, his mother's woven mat reduced to cinders, his father's workbench half buried in soot. Ren's throat tightened. Grief tries to rise like a wave, but the warrior instinct is to suppress it, to tighten the jaw, narrow the eyes, keep moving. Yet grief is not so easily commanded. It spills into the body, heavy and trembling. His hand shook as he touched the hilt of his sword. For the first time in his life, Ren felt afraid of his own uncertainty. He knelt beside a collapsed wall, fingertips touching the scorched earth. Who had done this? Bandits, rival clans, something darker. The questions swarmed, but answers hid in the smoke. Then among the ruins he saw it, something half buried under broken tiles. A sliver of parchment, its edges burned, but its ink miraculously intact. Ren lifted it carefully as if touching a fragile memory. It wasn't a letter, it wasn't a prayer. It was a fragment of an old teaching, an unfamiliar script written in sweeping strokes. Only one line remained fully readable. When the world collapses, walk the path of stillness. Ren frowned. He had trained in the 6 military disciplines, memorized the warrior doctrines, studied the great masters. But this phrase, this system, he had never heard of it. He scanned the ruins again, a strange sensation stirring behind his ribs. The message felt like an echo, a whisper from something ancient, something he was suddenly meant to find. For a long moment he just stood there, the scroll fragment fluttering in the wind. His identity, once forged from structure, honor, and predictable routine, now felt weightless, shattered like pottery across the ground. Humans cling to stability because the mind needs patterns. When those patterns collapse, the nervous system enters freefall. Ren felt that freefall now, a spiritual vertigo, a disorientation deeper than fear. But in the center of that disorientation, something else emerged, a pulse, a direction, the path of stillness. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew he had nothing left to lose by following it. As the last light of day painted the ruined village in gold, Ren turned toward the northern mountains, toward the place old travelers spoke of in hushed tones, a place where a hermit monk lived in silence, untouched by the world's chaos. Ren took one final breath of the familiar air he once called home. Then he stepped onto the path that would change him forever. Chapter 2: The Hermit Monk and the Temple of Silence. The mountains did not welcome Ren gently. They challenged him, each step slicing into his legs, each breath thinning in the cold air. The trail narrowed into jagged stone, winding upward like a questioning serpent. And yet as he climbed, the burned image of his village kept pace with him, rising in his mind with every heartbeat. For warriors, physical exhaustion is familiar, but spiritual exhaustion, that is the weight that turns bone into dust. Ren pressed onward. By dusk of the second day, he reached a cliff ledge overlooking a valley carved like a bowl into the earth. Somewhere in this expanse of shadow and snow sat the temple he had only heard rumors about, whispered by old merchants, dismissed by younger warriors as superstition. A temple untouched by war, untouched by time, untouched by noise. Ren moved forward, guided only by instinct and the strange pull of the scroll fragment in his pocket. The wind howled like an old spirit. Pine needles trembled, and then suddenly the noise vanished. Completely. Silence. A perfect, absolute silence, so deep it felt alive. Ren froze. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ahead, half hidden beneath an overhang of stone, stood a small wooden gate, weathered, ancient. Its beams were engraved with symbols so worn they were nearly swallowed by time. Ren stepped inside. The temple grounds were modest, a courtyard of smooth stones, a single shrine, a hall built of dark cedar, aged yet unbroken. Lanterns hung unlit, but the place somehow glowed with its own quiet presence. Ren felt the weight of it, not a burden, an awareness. Silence is not a lack of sound. It is a presence that reveals what sound usually hides. And in this silence, Ren felt the roar of his own mind. Footsteps broke the stillness, soft, measured, deliberate. From the temple doorway emerged a man draped in simple gray robes, his posture effortlessly straight, his gaze steady as a mountain. Master Kaidan. His hair was silver, tied back. His eyes were dark, but not in a threatening way. In a way that saw deeply, too deeply. Ren instinctively straightened, a reflex born from years of training. Though he sensed immediately that such formality meant nothing here, Kaidan stopped a few paces away, examining Ren without judgment. "You carry smoke in your eyes," the monk said quietly. His voice was calm, unforced, heavy with understanding. Ren swallowed. "My village, it has fallen." "I know," Kaidan replied. Ren stiffened. "How could you know that?" Kaidan turned slightly, gazing toward the horizon as though he could see through mountains. "The world speaks long before the world acts. Those who listen can hear the tremors." Ren did not understand. But the monk's tone was not mystical posturing. He spoke as though stating a simple fact. Kaidan walked past him, moving with the fluid ease of someone who had forgotten hurry long ago. "You seek something," he said, "but your body does not know what it is. Your mind believes it does, and your spirit, it trembles." Ren felt the truth of that. He reached into his cloak and offered the scroll fragment. "I found this among the ruins." Kaidan stopped mid-step, took the fragment gently, read it with a long exhale. "The path of stillness," he murmured, "a teaching long abandoned by the warriors of this land." Ren felt a flicker of hope. "Will you teach me?" Kaidan looked at him with a strange softness, like a parent watching a child ask for fire without knowing the burn. "I will show you," he said, "but understand, stillness is not a method, it is a mirror, and the first thing it shows you is everything you've been running from." Ren's breath tightened. "Enter," Kaidan instructed. "Your real training begins with silence." Ren stepped across the threshold, unaware he was leaving the man he once was behind. Chapter 3, The Combat of the Inner Arena. Ren expected training to begin with movement, a stance, a drill, a kata of some kind. But Master Kaidan had other plans. At dawn, the old monk led him to a small chamber carved into the stone behind the temple. The air was cold and dense, as if untouched by breath for centuries. The room held nothing except a single cushion placed at its center. Kaidan gestured to it. "Sit." Ren lowered himself, unsure. The silence pressed around him like invisible walls. "What do I do?" he asked. Kaidan sat across from him, legs folded, hands resting loosely. "Nothing." Ren blinked. "Nothing?" "Yes," Kaidan said, and do it completely." The young warrior waited for explanation. None came. Instead, silence. And in that silence, Ren became aware of the storm inside himself. His thoughts raced. The fire, the faces he lost, the fear of having no home, the question of who destroyed everything, the question of who he is now. "Your mind is loud," Kaidan said without opening his eyes. Ren exhaled sharply. "I cannot stop thinking." "You are not meant to stop, you are meant to witness." Kaidan's voice was steady as a still lake, to observe without wrestling, to let the mind unravel its knots on its own. Ren closed his eyes, trying to follow the instruction. Immediately, images surfaced, smoke billowing, walls collapsing, the trembling of his own hands. His breath grew shallow. "This is pointless," Ren muttered. Kaidan's tone sharpened. "This is the point. This chamber is your enemy, and your enemy is not made of flesh." Ren clenched his jaw. He had trained against blades, fists, spears, and archers, but this, sitting still, felt harder than all of them. Minutes stretched, or maybe hours. There was no measure of time in this cave, only Ren and the noise he had never confronted. Master Kaidan finally spoke, his voice low but fierce. "Your entire life you've been taught to strike outward, but the greatest battles are inward, against fear, illusion, and the ego's desperate needs. Ren forced his eyes open. Then teach me to fight them. Kaidan leaned closer. You already are. This discomfort you feel, this agitation, this need to escape, these are your opponents. Ren felt his heartbeat spike. Why does it hurt more than any wound? Because the body heals, Kaidan said, but the mind repeats. It hides, it lies, it clings. Facing this mind requires a warrior far greater than the one who wields a sword. Silence followed, but this time it wasn't empty. It felt like the room was waiting for Ren to decide whether he would continue or break. Ren closed his eyes again, this time slower, more deliberate. He let the chaos rise. He let the terror surface. He let the images burn behind his eyelids until they blurred into nothing. He began to see patterns, how every fear was tied to loss, how every thought was tied to identity, how his need for control was a fragile shield against uncertainty. Kaidan spoke again, gentle now. This is your inner arena, Ren. And until you learn to stand calmly within it, your outer battles will always defeat you. Ren inhaled deeply, feeling a strange pressure inside his chest. Not pain, but release, like something clenched was slowly beginning to loosen. He understood then. Mastery was not the absence of fear. It was the ability to face it without retreat. When he opened his eyes, Kaidan nodded once, as though acknowledging the first true step Ren had taken. Good, the monk said, you have begun to see. The training was far from over, but something fundamental had shifted. Chapter 4, The Forge of Discipline and the Death of the Ego Dawn, broke over the mountains like a slow blade of gold, slicing through the mist. Ren stood in the courtyard, breath forming faint clouds, muscles stiff from the long night of sitting. He expected Kaidan to return him to the meditation chamber, but today the monk had a different intention. Kaidan approached with a wooden staff, not as a weapon, but as a pointer. He tapped the stone beneath Ren's feet. Today, we rebuild, the master said, but first we must break what still holds you. Ren straightened. I thought I had already broken. Kaidan shook his head. You cracked. That is not the same. He circled Ren with slow steps, the way a craftsman examines raw material before forging it into something worthy. You have glimpsed your fear. You have seen your illusions. But the ego is the most persistent shadow. It clings even when burned. Ren felt a flare of defensiveness rise in his chest. Proof Kaidan was right. The monk raised the staff and tapped Ren's sternum. This is where the ego hides its fortress, behind the warrior's pride, behind the belief that you must be strong at all times. Ren's jaw tightened. Strength is all I have left. Kaidan's expression softened. No, strength is what remains when you no longer need to appear strong. Ren lowered his gaze, unsure how to respond. Kaidan gestured toward a circle drawn in the dirt. Stand here. When Ren stepped inside, Kaidan placed a large stone on the ground in front of him. The rock was heavy, shaped by time, its edges worn smooth. Lift it, Kaidan commanded. Ren gripped the stone, tightened his core, and lifted it chest high with a grunt. Kaidan shook his head. Too tense, too dependent on force. Should I not use strength? Ren asked. Use discipline, Kaidan replied. Strength without discipline is noise. Discipline without strength is emptiness. You must merge the two. He motioned again. Lift. Ren exhaled, relaxed his shoulders, grounded his feet, and lifted. The stone rose, not easier, but cleaner, steadier. Good, Kaidan said. Well, now hold. Seconds stretched. Ren's arms trembled. Sweat formed at his temples. What do you feel? Kaidan asked. Pain, Ren muttered. Pain reveals truth, Kaidan said. Listen. Ren focused inward, past the strain, past the instinct to drop the stone, past the ego screaming, I can't. He found a quiet place beneath it all, a place of calm effort. When Kaidan finally allowed him to lower the stone, Ren felt a surprising clarity. This is the first principle of the ancient system, Kaidan said, to act from awareness, not reaction, to move without the ego shouting directions. He led Ren through slow stances, simple movements, yet infinitely precise. Feet grounding into earth, hips aligned with breath, arms slicing through air as if shaping intention itself. This is called Kenshin Taiso, Kaidan explained, the discipline of the body-heart. Warriors abandoned it centuries ago because it offers no glory. It offers only transformation. Ren felt the truth of that. Each movement chipped away at something old within him, an identity built on proving himself, winning battles, earning honor. Kaidan watched him carefully. You have lived your entire life outward, he said. Your ego was forged in the gaze of others. Now you must forge a self that does not depend on eyes to exist. Ren's breath slowed. The movements became meditation. And for the first time, he felt power emerging, not from performance, but from presence. Kaidan nodded. Good. You are learning to stand without leaning on who you used to be. A cold wind swept across the courtyard, and Ren exhaled, a long, grounded breath. Inside that breath, he felt something dissolve. Not weakness, not fear, but the version of himself that could no longer survive the path ahead. Chapter 5, The Return to Fire, Walking the Path Unbroken. The morning Ren left the mountain, the world seemed quieter. Not because it had changed, but because he had. The path downward was the same treacherous trail he had climbed weeks earlier, yet each stone felt different beneath his feet. His breath was deeper. His steps were slower, but not hesitant, measured, intentional, awake. Master Kaidan walked beside him for the first half of the descent. He said little, but his presence carried the weight of farewell. You are no longer the boy who climbed this mountain, Kaidan said at last. Ren nodded. I feel that. Kaidan studied him with the discerning eye of a craftsman assessing his work. You have learned stillness. You have met your fear. You have broken your ego. But wisdom means nothing until it has walked into the world that wounded you. Ren looked toward the valley, where smoke once curled like a dark omen. What if I lose myself again? Kaidan stopped walking. Then return to your breath. That is the blade no enemy can steal. Ren bowed deeply, deeper than tradition required. Thank you, Master. Kaidan offered a final, rare smile. Do not thank me. Thank the fire that forced you here. With that, the monk turned and began climbing back toward the temple. He did not look over his shoulder. Ren did not expect him to. When the monk's silhouette faded into mist, Ren began the rest of the descent alone. The world below had not grown kinder in his absence. The forest felt darker, the roads emptier, the air thicker with the memory of loss. By midday, Ren reached the outskirts of the valley that once held his village. Before stepping into the open, he paused. He placed a hand on his abdomen, the center of breath, the anchor Kaidan had drilled into him. Inhale, exhale, presence returns. Ren walked forward. What he found shocked him, not because it was unexpected, but because he finally saw it with clarity instead of fear. The ruins were still there, blackened wood, broken stone, silence clinging like ash. But this time, Ren didn't collapse under the weight of it. He stood tall in the center of the destruction, letting the memory rise without drowning in it. After several moments, he knelt and let his fingers brush the earth where his home once stood. "It is all right to grieve," he whispered to himself. Master Kaidan's voice echoed in his mind. "Pain is the doorway. Step through it." Ren closed his eyes and stepped. He felt the sorrow fully, not resisting, not clinging, simply allowing it to move through him like wind through an open gate. When he stood again, he was lighter. A rustle came from behind him. Ren turned slowly, no fear, only awareness. 3 figures stepped from the shadows of the trees. Bandits. The same style of armor, the same markings he had glimpsed the day he found the village burning. Once, Ren's muscles would have tensed. Once, his breath would have spiked. Once, the trembling in his sword hand would have betrayed him. But now, his breath stayed smooth. His posture remained grounded. His spirit did not waver. One bandit sneered. Another survivor. Another raised his blade. "We missed one." Ren felt no hatred. No vengeance clouded his vision, only clarity, pure and sharp. He entered the Zen Combat State without intention, as naturally as stepping into sunlight. His hand found the hilt of his sword. His exhale quieted the world. His mind stilled into a perfect mirror. Not a ripple, not a tremor, only presence. For the first time in his life, Ren understood. Mastery was not the destruction of enemies, but the destruction of fear. He stepped forward, embodying the silent strength the mountain had carved into him.